the alien queen offered peace, only if a human shared her throne. The first time humanity saw the alien queen was not through telescopes or intercepted transmissions but when her flagship, a vessel so vast it eclipsed the sun in orbit, descended into Earth's atmosphere and cast a shadow across oceans and continents alike, its silver hull shimmering with otherworldly light as cities went silent and the world's militaries braced for war. Yet instead of fire raining down from its cannons there came a message broadcast in every language, every frequency, every channel that could carry a human voice, though it was no human voice at all. It was hers, resonant, commanding, with an undertone that carried both menace and grace, announcing to Earth that she, sovereign of 1,000 conquered worlds, would grant peace, protection, and prosperity to humankind under her empire, but only if one condition was met, only if a single human shared her throne, not as a prisoner nor as a puppet, but as her consort, her equal, her bond between two civilizations. And when those words reached the ears of soldiers standing ready on borders and bases, none were more shaken than Captain Elias Ward, a career soldier hardened by decades of training and battles in Earth's outer colonies, who suddenly found his name singled out, spoken by her as if plucked from the marrow of the universe. Captain Elias Ward, you shall come forth, for you will decide whether your world burns in resistance or thrives in unity. And the shock that followed was indescribable. Governments collapsing into emergency meetings, generals shouting in disbelief, leaders questioning why this one soldier, among billions, had been chosen, yet Elias himself, standing on the deck of a naval base in the Pacific, staring at the hovering leviathan that turned daylight into dusk, could not answer that question either because he had never met her, had never dreamed his life would be measured against the fate of Earth, and yet now the eyes of every leader, every citizen, every terrified child in bunkers and every soldier with trembling hands on a trigger were upon him, the weight of humanity pressed onto his chest like an iron shroud. And though he felt the instinctive urge to refuse, to declare humanity's independence and spit defiance into the void, he also knew the grim truth. Earth was defenseless against such power, their fleets were fragmented, their weapons decades behind the shimmering armadas of her empire, and if peace could only be secured by sacrificing his freedom, by accepting a role he neither sought nor wanted, then how could he, a soldier sworn to protect his people, say no? But as he wrestled with this silent torment, his orders came down, curt and absolute. Captain Ward, you will meet her, and within hours he was transported aboard a shuttle, his uniform stiff on his shoulders, his heart hammering as the world's leaders stood by, some furious, some pleading, some silent with resignation, and he knew that in their eyes he was no longer merely a man, he was a bargaining chip, a sacrifice, perhaps a savior if luck held, and as the shuttle rose into the shadow of her colossal ship he caught his first glimpse of its surface, smooth as liquid steel, alive with veins of blue energy pulsing like the lifeblood of a titan, and when he crossed the threshold into its hangar he felt his breath stolen, for it was not a sterile dock but a cathedral of alien architecture, soaring pillars of crystal and light bending in ways human minds could scarcely comprehend, soldiers of her kind standing in silent ranks, their eyes like molten silver watching him not with hatred but with the eerie curiosity one reserves for an unexpected guest. And then she appeared, the alien queen herself, striding forward draped in robes that shimmered as though woven from starlight, her crown a circlet of living metal that pulsed with energy, her face humanoid yet unearthly, features sculpted with symmetry too precise for nature, her skin like pale luminescence, her eyes twin galaxies swirling with depth and danger, and though Elias was not a man easily swayed by appearances, he felt a chill in his soul at the sight of her, not merely because of her beauty but because of the weight of centuries that seemed to radiate from her presence, as if she had seen empires rise and fall, worlds born and extinguished, and carried them all in her gaze, and when she spoke it was not through speakers now but directly, her lips forming words that echoed through the hall. Human soldier, you stand before me not as a prisoner but as a choice, for your people tremble at the edge of annihilation, and I alone can hold back the storm, yet I will not do so for free, I will not chain myself to a world that resists my touch, instead I demand a bond, a partner who represents not just humanity but the courage it takes to stand before me without fear, and I have chosen you, Elias Ward, not because you are the strongest nor the most powerful, but because you are the one who carries loyalty in your marrow and defiance in your veins, a man who will not break though the galaxy itself presses upon him. And as her words rolled through him, Elias felt the weight double, for now it was not merely the governments of Earth forcing this upon him, it was her, a queen who commanded more firepower than all of humanity combined, yet she did not speak like a tyrant but like a woman seeking something deeper than conquest, and though Elias wanted to shout, to demand why him, to reject the notion that one life should determine the fate of billions, all he managed was a rasp. "And if I refuse?" And her answer was as merciless as the void itself. "Then I leave your world to the fate it has earned, destruction, for peace cannot be given to those who spit upon it." And silence fell in the hall, silence so deep that Elias could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, and in that heartbeat he understood the cruel truth, that this was no choice at all. Not if he valued the lives of his people, not if he remembered the faces of the soldiers he had buried and the civilians he had sworn to protect. Yet the part of him that was still a man and not a symbol rebelled, whispering that to surrender himself was to surrender his freedom, his future, and perhaps even his soul. And in that fracture between duty and desire he realized that the days to come would not merely test his loyalty to Earth but his very humanity, for to sit on her throne was to step into a world where love and war were indistinguishable, where peace was purchased with a bond as intimate as it was political. And as he looked into the alien queen's eyes, galaxies swirling like storms in endless night, he felt the beginning of something stir, a recognition that this was not the end of his journey but its true beginning, and with a voice steadier than he felt, Elias whispered the words that sealed not just his fate but that of Earth itself. "I will come with you." And the alien queen's expression softened, not with triumph but with something stranger, something almost human, relief. And in that moment Elias Ward realized that whatever her empire demanded, whatever her ultimatum threatened, there was a secret beneath her crown, a truth yet unspoken, and his heart trembled not from fear of death or duty but from the mystery of what it truly meant to share her throne. The journey from Earth's skies into the alien queen's empire was not a leap measured in distance alone but in the vast gulf between everything Elias Ward had ever known and everything he had been thrust into. For when the flagship carried him through the void it was not toward some barren outpost or sterile station but into the heart of a dominion so enormous that it dwarfed human imagination, a network of stars bound together under her reign, each world flickering like a jewel in the ocean of night. And though Elias had studied war his entire life, had memorized tactics and campaigns, had buried comrades under flags and iron, nothing could prepare him for the scale of her empire nor the strange, silent awe it stirred in him as the flagship slipped into the traffic lanes of vessels larger than Earth's continents, their hulls adorned with glyphs of her dynasty, their weapons glimmering like constellations forged of steel. And as the Earth fell behind him he felt both the weight of separation and the tether of duty tighten, for he was no longer a captain among soldiers, he was humanity's solitary envoy, its only chance at survival, and that knowledge both anchored him and gnawed at him, reminding him that each breath he took was bought by billions of lives that depended on him not faltering, not breaking, not surrendering too soon to despair. Yet when he thought of despair he also thought of her, the alien queen, seated upon her throne in the great hall of her ship, watching him with eyes that seemed to peel back every layer of his resolve, eyes that asked questions without words, eyes that carried the weight of empires and the loneliness of a soul surrounded by power yet untouched by companionship. And though Elias told himself she was an enemy, a conqueror whose hand had pressed against the throats of 1,000 species, he could not deny the flicker of something else each time their gazes met, something unnerving and dangerous, something that might have been recognition or might have been temptation. But either way it followed him like a shadow as the days stretched into the void. When at last the flagship arrived at her capital world, Elias saw what no human had ever seen, a planet not carved by nature's slow hand but sculpted by will, its continents reshaped into sprawling cities that glowed like circuitry visible from orbit, oceans redirected into channels that sparkled with light, towers of crystal rising so high they seemed to pierce the sky itself, and at the heart of it all, a palace that defied comprehension, its spires twisting into the heavens as though they were grown from the bones of stars, its domes glimmering with energy that pulsed like a heartbeat, and Elias felt his breath falter because this was not merely a seat of power, it was a statement, a monument to her reign, a promise to all who approached that she was eternal, unshakable, and above all unchallengeable. Yet as his shuttle descended through its atmosphere, escorted by a phalanx of her personal guard, he did not feel crushed beneath its grandeur but sharpened, for if he was to stand by her side, if he was to play the role she demanded, then he would not do so as a broken servant but as the soldier he had always been. And when he stepped onto the marble-like platform of her throne hall, thousands of her subjects gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of reverence, suspicion, and fear, and he realized in that instant that he was not merely a man in foreign halls, he was a symbol, the first human to walk their sacred spaces, the chosen partner of their queen, and his every word, every gesture, every falter would ripple through her empire like thunder. The throne hall was vast beyond reason, its ceilings arched with beams of living crystal that resonated faintly with sound, its walls alive with murals that shifted as if they were woven from memory itself, and at the center rose the throne, carved not from stone but from a single piece of metal older than her empire, a relic of some ancient conquest, and upon it sat the alien queen, her robes flowing like liquid silver, her crown shimmering with veins of energy that pulsed to her heartbeat. And as Elias approached under the weight of 1,000 watching eyes she rose, her every movement measured, graceful yet commanding, and with a voice that carried across the hall without need of amplification she spoke words not to her people but to him. You have stepped into my world, human soldier, and now it is time for you to understand what it means to share my throne, for this is not a bargain of convenience nor a performance of peace. It is a binding, one that ties not only us but our peoples, one that demands strength equal to mine, for if you falter, they will falter, if you rise, they will rise, and if you betray me, the weight of 1,000 worlds will turn upon you. And though Elias wanted to bristle at the threat woven through her vow, he also heard in it the echo of something deeper, a truth she could not disguise, that beneath the steel and fire of her empire she had tethered herself to him as surely as he was tethered to her. And for the first time he wondered if her condition, her demand for a human to share her throne, was not born of conquest but of necessity, perhaps even desperation, though he could not yet name what for. The days that followed were a blur of ceremonies, councils, and lessons, for though Elias had been a soldier all his life, the role she thrust upon him was no battlefield he recognized, it was a theater of politics, a war of words and gazes where each gesture was a declaration, each silence a weapon, and under the watchful eyes of her ministers and generals he was tested, questioned, measured like or in a forge, some treating him as a curiosity, others as a threat, and still others as a weakness that could fracture her rule. Yet through it all the alien queen remained unshaken, presenting him as her chosen equal, her bond to humanity, and though her people's whispers rose like storms she silenced them not with fire but with her unwavering certainty, and Elias began to see in her what others could not, the iron will of a ruler who had borne solitude for too long, who had stood atop her throne for centuries surrounded by sycophants and generals yet bereft of anyone who could stand beside her without bowing too deeply, and though Elias resisted, though he told himself daily that he was here for earth, that his duty was to endure until peace was secured, he could not prevent the moments in between, the quiet hours when they walked the palace gardens lit by suns harvested from distant systems, when she spoke not as queen but as woman, her voice softer, her laughter rare but sharp enough to unsettle him, and in those moments he saw her not as a conqueror but as a soul, burdened by eternity, longing for a connection she could not find among her own kind. But with each day that he lingered by her side, the tension outside the palace walls grew sharper, for whispers of dissent echoed through her empire, whispers that claimed she had weakened herself by tethering to a human, that her choice betrayed her people, that peace with earth was a sign of decay not strength, and as Elias listened in council halls to ministers' warning of rebellion, of rival warlords eyeing her throne, he realized that he had been dragged not into the resolution of a conflict but into its heart, for his presence had not ended war, it had only shifted its battlefield, and though humanity was spared annihilation for now, the alien queen's empire was beginning to fracture under the weight of her gamble, and he stood as both the symbol of her promise and the wedge that could destroy her reign, and in the quiet hours when she let her guard fall, when she spoke of the wars she had fought, the betrayal she had endured, the loneliness that clung to her crown, Elias began to understand that her demand for a human on her throne was not just an ultimatum, it was a plea, a desperate attempt to anchor herself to something beyond conquest, something human, something real, and though he did not yet know if he could give her that, he knew with growing certainty that the path before them was narrowing, and soon he would have to decide not only whether he could endure her throne but whether he could truly share it. The first time Elias realized the empire was truly cracking was not in the council chambers where ministers raised their voices nor in the intelligence reports that whispered of warlords gathering fleets at the edge of loyal space, but in the silence of the alien queen herself, for though she carried herself with the same regal poise, though her crown shimmered with the same relentless light, though her gaze still held galaxies in its depths, there were moments now when her shoulders sank when she believed no one was watching, moments when her hand lingered against the throne as though the weight of centuries had suddenly grown heavier, and it was in those moments Elias understood the truth that no subject of hers dared speak aloud, that her gamble, the offering of peace through him, had not merely tested the patience of her empire but fractured it, that by choosing him she had chosen to stand against voices that whispered of her weakness, and those voices were no longer whispers but battle cries in the far reaches of her dominion, and he, the human soldier who had once thought himself only a pawn, now found himself at the center of a storm that threatened not only Earth's fragile survival but the very reign of the woman who had bound his fate to hers. 4 weeks the tension thickened, emissaries arriving daily to accuse her of folly, generals demanding she renounce him, ministers warning that civil war was inevitable if she did not cast off her bond with a human, and through it all she never wavered, standing in the great hall with Elias at her side, presenting him not as weakness but as strength, declaring that peace with Earth would mark the beginning of a new era where her empire was not merely a machine of conquest but a union of equals. And though her words carried power, though her presence still commanded awe, Elias could see the cracks widening, and he knew the day was coming when words would no longer suffice. That day came when a rival fleet breached the capital's defense perimeters, a coalition of warlords who had once bowed to her crown but now saw her choice as the moment to strike, their armadas pouring into orbit with weapons primed, demanding her abdication, demanding his execution, demanding the end of her vision before it could take root. And as alarms howled through the palace corridors, Elias stood beside her on the balcony overlooking the city of crystal towers, watching as its citizens trembled under the shadow of incoming warships, and he turned to her, his soldiers' instincts roaring to life, and said, "Let me fight." But she shook her head, her voice calm but edged with sorrow. "This is not a battle of ships and soldiers, Elias. It is a battle of thrones, and only those who sit upon them can end it." Her meaning struck him like a blade, for he realized then that this was the moment her entire ultimatum had been building toward, that the bond she had demanded from him was not a symbol for peace but a weapon against those who would deny it, for only by sharing her throne in the eyes of her empire, only by becoming not just a guest but her equal, could they prove that her gamble was not weakness but strength. And if he faltered now, if he hesitated, then Earth would burn, her empire would fall. And she would be remembered not as a queen of conquest nor of peace but as a sovereign undone by her own loneliness. And so when the warlord's envoys stormed into the hall, their voices thunderous with threats, Elias did not remain in the shadows as an observer but stepped forward, his boots striking the crystal floor with defiance, his voice cutting through their fury as he declared, "I am Elias, Ward of Earth, chosen by your queen not as a servant but as her equal, and if you seek her throne you will find it guarded by both of us, for where she stands I stand, and if you would burn Earth you will first have to burn me." And the hall erupted in chaos, ministers gasping, generals whispering, warlords sneering, but in that uproar something shifted, for the alien queen rose from her throne and stood beside him, her hand brushing against his not in command but in solidarity, and together they faced the storm of her empire, two figures against the tide of history, and in that unity Elias felt the strange, undeniable truth that he had not been dragged into this destiny by chance but by something deeper, something that had been waiting across the stars for both of them. And as the warlords threatened war she unleashed her final card, activating the palace's central spire, a beacon that broadcast their bond across the empire, a vision of queen and human standing side by side, a declaration that peace would not be bartered nor begged but lived, and though fleets clashed in orbit, though fire lit the skies, the image spread faster than any weapon, reaching worlds where subjects had grown weary of endless conquest, weary of bloodshed, weary of crowns forged only in war. And for the first time in centuries the empire saw a ruler not demanding fear but offering hope, not standing alone upon her throne but sharing it. The battle raged for hours, the capital's defenses straining, Elias gripping a weapon once more as soldiers clashed in the palace corridors, yet through it all he remained at her side, fighting not just with steel but with presence, every moment proving to those who doubted that he was not a weakness but a shield, not a foreigner but a partner. And when the final warlord's flagship fell in flames above the capital, when the enemy's fleets scattered into the void, defeated not only by force but by the tide of loyalty her beacon had inspired, Elias stood bloodied but unbroken, the alien queen at his side, her crown glimmering with renewed fire, and in that moment the hall erupted not in whispers but in cheers, her ministers bowing, her soldiers saluting, her people crying out not in fear but in awe, for they had seen with their own eyes the strength of a throne shared. And yet as the fires dimmed and silence returned, Elias felt the deeper weight settle, for though the battle was won, the path ahead was more perilous than ever, for to truly share her throne was to step fully into her world, to bind himself not only to her but to the empire, to abandon the life he had once known and become something new, something neither fully human nor fully alien. And as he looked at her, her gaze fixed upon him with both triumph and vulnerability, he realized the final decision was his. Not whether to protect Earth, not whether to survive, but whether to love her, to accept the bond not as duty but as truth. That night, in the quiet of the throne chamber after the fires of war had cooled, the alien queen removed her crown and set it upon the armrest, her robe falling from her shoulders as she stepped toward him not as sovereign but as woman, her voice stripped of command, trembling as she whispered, I demanded you for peace, Elias Ward, but I kept you for myself, and if you cannot share my throne with your heart, then let us end it here before we both shatter. And for the first time he saw her not as queen nor conqueror but as someone achingly human in her need, and the soldier in him, the man who had once believed his fate was nothing but orders and survival, felt something within him break open, a recognition that had been building since the day he first saw galaxies swirling in her eyes, and he stepped forward, placing his scarred hands upon hers, his voice steady though his heart thundered. Then, let it not be duty that binds us but choice, my choice. And with those words he sealed not a treaty but a bond, not a bargain but a vow, and as dawn rose across the Empire's capital, light spilling through the crystalline towers, the image of queen and human seated together upon the throne spread across the stars, and for the first time in generations peace was not a word spoken in fear but a reality forged in love. And so history remembered that day not as the moment Earth bowed nor as the moment the Empire faltered, but as the day two thrones became one, as the day a soldier and a queen chose each other and in doing so chose peace. And though war would always linger at the edges of the galaxy, though challenges would rise again, the bond they had forged stood as a light against the darkness, a promise that love was stronger than conquest. And Elias Ward, once a soldier of Earth, now sat forever as the human who shared the alien queen's throne.